Hi everybody, welcome back to Fossman Media. In this video I plan on covering a full Debian install, including the manual partitioning method. Then when we're done with the installation, I'll show you how to set up Timeshift to use the correct designated partition to store its snapshots. And then at the end I'll also show you how to perform a system recovery, just in case disaster happens to strike. If you're not using Debian but looking for a guide on how to partition your hard drive manually, you should be able to follow along with this tutorial either way, as your installer will look different, but all the concepts will be the same. So a couple of the reasons why you may want to partition your hard drive manually may be that you want to add a separate partition for your system backups, and this way you'll keep all those files separate from the rest of your system. You may want to add additional partitions for your home folder, var directory, and so on. Or another possible reason could be that you want to change the size of your swap partition or its location on the drive. Because by default, most Linux installers will create a swap partition that is the same size of your the RAM that you have available on your system, but it'll place this partition right at the end of the drive, which can be a problem if you plan on adding additional partitions in the future or running heavy applications that require a lot more memory. So as you can see on my screen here, I already have a virtual machine all set up and ready to go. As far as the firmware is concerned, I chose BIOS because I'll be using the master boot record for today. And I think I'll save UEFI for a different video, just because there is going to be a couple discrepancies when we go to partition the hard drive. And I just want to eliminate any possible confusion there between the two. For the OS, I chose Debian 10. But if you're installing a newer version, such as 11 or possibly even 12 by the time this video finally comes out, the installer and partition manager are exactly the same. And I think that goes back quite a while too, as Debian's been using the same installer for just about as long as I can remember, which is one of the things I really do like about Debian, is they seem to stick with the philosophy of if it isn't broken, don't fix it. And why it gets a lot of flack, I'm not quite sure. Whether it's because the installer does kind of jump back and forth when we go to partition the hard drive. But I'm sure after we go through it the first time, you'll understand exactly why it does that. And you'll learn to love it as much as I do. For the CPUs, I only gave it 2. Because you can see up top here, I only have 4 available. But that shouldn't be an issue at all for today. And memory, I only gave it 4 gigabytes of RAM, which will be a little bit tight, considering we are going to be installing GNOME. But I kind of wanted it that way to use this as a test, because one of the main reasons why I wanted to partition my drive manually in the first place was just so I could decrease the size of my swap partition and hopefully prevent the system from using it as much as possible. So yeah, I think this will be a good test for that. And as far as the system goes, I think that about covers it. So I think what we can do next is just begin the installation. So to do that, I'm just going to click on the Begin Installation button here up on the top left and create the virtual machine. But if you're using a hard disk, obviously instead of a virtual machine, you won't even see this step. It'll just boot off your USB and go right into the installation, which you'll see here in a couple seconds. Here we go. I'll just make this full screen so you can see it a bit better. And then scroll down to the graphical installer. The normal Debian installer is pretty much exactly the same as the graphical. I think the only difference is with the graphical you can use a mouse, and the highlight colors are blue instead of red. But they're pretty much the exact same thing. So I figured graphical installer would be the most popular, so I'm just going to select that. And then if you've ever installed Debian before, I'm sure this looks familiar. So I'm just going to hit enter to select English. Same thing with the United States. American English for keyboard works. Just give it a minute here to load stuff up. So now it's going to be connecting the network. And if you're using Wi-Fi, right now you'll probably be prompted to enter in your Wi-Fi password. But if you're using Ethernet, everything should look the same as what you're seeing right now. and then put in your host name or whichever name you want to call your computer. For me, I think I'm just going to call this Debian MBR. And enter. Enter to skip the domain name. Don't need one of those. I'm just going to skip the root password by hitting enter. And then throw in the full name of your user. So I was going to say Foster Media. And Foster won't work for username. And then your password. As for your time zone, for me, I'm going to go with Eastern and enter. And here we go with the partitioner. So I found most tutorials on YouTube when installing Debian always went with the guided. But today we're going to be playing around with stuff. So I'm going to select manual and enter. And then select your volume. So just be really careful here if you have, if you're installing this alongside another operating system, that you choose the right volume. Because if you don't, obviously it'll overwrite that file system, and I'm guessing you don't want that. But if this is the only operating system that you're going to be installing on this computer or on this drive, yeah, you don't have to worry about that as much, and you can just select this volume like I am right now. And then I'll want to create a partition table because there isn't one that exists on this machine yet, which is always nice too, because that way you can start off nice and clean. So if you're presented with the option to create a new partition table, yeah, I'd definitely do that. So I'm just going to hit enter. And then here's all our free space. And as far as partitioning schemes go, I'm just going to explain my method of madness here. Then we can continue partitioning the hard drive. So for starters, I actually only prefer 4 partitions. And the first one would be boot, for boot, second for root, third for swap, and the last one for recovery. A couple reasons for this would include, say, number one, the same scheme can be used whether I'm booting into the installation using master boot record or UEFI. Another reason would be is that the system just seems to run more efficiently. If this is just because less is more, or due to the fact that no logical partitions need to be created, I'm not quite sure. But in case you're unaware, MBR only allows you to create 4 partitions in total. And if you want to add additional partitions, the 4th one needs to be made logical, as well as all the partitions that follow that one. So in theory, there would still only be 4 partitions, except the following partitions after the 4th one that are logical can be thought of as virtual and not actual partitions. But after a lot of research and trial and error, this was the conclusion that I came to, as I've decided to use only 4 partitions in all my systems, whether they're master boot record or UEFI. Even though UEFI will allow for as many primary partitions as you would like. Well, there is a maximum number there, but it is huge, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but far more than the average user would ever need. And as far as the home folder is concerned, I just like to make sure that it's properly backed up, including its .dot files, and then just manually copy them over into the new home directory after the new system and applications have been installed. And even though I'll only be setting up 4 partitions today, I'll also explain as we go along how you go about adding more, if that was the route that you decide to go. So yeah, with all that being said, if you're starting to get a headache, I think that's normal. But I think for now, I'll just start partitioning the hard drive. So as you can see, I just have one big block of free space here. And that's because I set up a new partition table. If you decide not to do that, you're probably seeing a bunch of other partitions below this one. And I just go ahead and highlight each one of those and delete them. And then that way you don't have to worry about anything conflicting from your old partitions with your new install. And to do that, you would just highlight each one, hit enter, and then select delete partition. And just keep doing that until you're left with one big block of free space. But yeah, now that I have that selected, I'm just going to hit enter. And then again, to create a new partition. And this will be the boot partition, the first one. And I'm just going to give it 1 gigabyte. And the reason I'm giving it 1 gigabyte is because the master boot record uses approximately between 80 and 100 megabytes on the boot partition after everything's installed. And even though we're not going to be covering it in this video, UEFI needs an absolute minimum of 536.9 megabytes or something like that. So I just always have it in the back of my head to use 1 gigabyte for boot. And then that way I'll know I'll always have enough. So, and that gives us a little bit of wiggle room too. And these days, 1 gigabyte on modern systems is practically nothing. So yeah, I'm just going to hit enter there. And then again for primary and again for beginning. The file system will have to change from ext4 to ext2. So I'm just going to hit enter and then select ext2 and hit enter. The reason for that is because the bootable partition doesn't need journaling. And as you can see up here, ext4 and ext3 have journaling. And because you don't need that, I'm just going to select ext2. And hopefully that'll help speed up the boot process. Mount point now is set to root. And then we're going to want to change that to boot. So just hit enter when you're on that. And select boot. Hit enter. Mount options can be left to defaults. Labels already at boot. And that didn't autofill. It's just because I was playing with this installer earlier. And I think it just remembered what I put in there. Reserve blocks 5% is default. You can leave that. Same thing with typical usage. You don't need to touch that. And this is going to look really strange, but I'm actually going to leave the bootable flag as off for the boot partition. And that's because the bootable flag on the root partition has to be on, or the system most likely won't boot. And the installer won't let me have 2 different partitions simultaneously with the boot flag of on. So the first time I set up my system like this, I paced back and forth and thinking it wasn't going to work. But lo and behold, everything worked out just fine. And that's the way I've used it ever since. And I've installed, I don't know how many different operating systems this way with master boot record. And it works every time. So it's actually the opposite to UEFI. If we were setting up UEFI, the boot partition would have the bootable flag on. And then the root partition would have the bootable flag is off. So yeah, I just think MBR is just the opposite. And yeah, with all that there, I'm just going to select on setting up partition and hit enter. And then select the free space so we can set up root. So I'm just going to hit enter. And then as far as the root partition is concerned, because of my virtual machine, I'm just going to give this 50 gigabytes. But you'll want to make this a lot bigger. I think the absolute minimum is about 100 gigabytes that you'll want for root. But if you're only setting up 4 partitions like I am right now, you'll have to do a little bit of math here. And I just take your the total amount of storage that you have, like say it's 1 terabyte, and subtract whatever you use for swap, then whatever you use for boot and recovery, and then whatever you have left over I'd use for root. Because swap's pretty much predetermined. I usually use 24 gigabytes for that. And then your boot was 1 gigabyte. And recovery, you'll want at least 50 gigabytes. So yeah, which leaves 925 gigabytes if you have 1 terabyte. And yeah, it does take a little bit of math, but it'll definitely work out. Because normally your home partition would be the last one. And you just use max for that, and that would make up the difference. But because we're not going to have a specified home partition, it'll also be inside of root. So yeah, your root partition will definitely need to be substantial. So that will definitely be the bulk of your storage with this partitioning scheme. So yeah, with that in there, I'm just going to hit enter. And then go up to primary, hit enter. And then again for beginning. And ext4 is good for root. Mount point though will have to change from home to root. So hit enter on root. And then label's already at root. That's just because I was playing with it earlier. That did not autofill. And labels are extremely nice to have, especially when you're using system tools later on after everything's installed, such as Timeshift. Then that way you can clearly see what the name of the partition is that you're dealing with. And it just eliminates a lot of guesswork later on. So yeah, don't forget about your label. And then bootable flag, we're going to have to change this to on. So I'm just going to hit enter. and it'll change to on. So really, when we're setting up all these partitions, the only fields we really need to worry about are the file system, the mount point, the label, and the bootable flag, whereas everything else can just be left at defaults, such as the mount options, reserved blocks, and typical usage. You don't even have to touch those. So yeah, we're only concerned about the file system, the mount point, the label, and the bootable flag. So yeah, for root, everything looks good there. I'm just going to hit enter to select on setting up partition. And then next we have swap. And take note too of the capital B on the boot partition, or sorry, on the root partition, just to indicate that it is actually bootable, or that's where the bootable flag is. But yep, to set up swap, I'm just going to select free space and hit enter and create new partition. And for swap, like I previously mentioned, I think I'm going to give it 24 gigabytes, which seems like a large number. But old rule of thumb was always that you wanted to allocate the same amount of space for your swap as you have RAM. And then that eventually changed to you want to have a minimum of 16 gigabytes if you add your swap in your RAM. And then that changed to you want to have double whatever your RAM is for your swap. And that was about a year or two ago. So who knows what it could be now. This is definitely open to interpretation, whereas everyone has a different opinion on this subject. But I just always use 24 gigabytes and haven't had any problems with it. So I kind of just try to stick with what works and until it doesn't, I guess. But I think this will work for quite a while. But yeah, all that being said, I'm just going to hit enter here. Use 24 gigs, select primary, and then beginning. And this will be swap, so we want to change the file system. So hit enter and just select swap area. And then everything else will autofill. Just leave the bootable flag as off, and then select on setting up partition. And then our last partition will be recovery. So we can just select free space, create new partition. And because we'll be using the rest of the disk, I'm just going to type in max and hit enter. This will also be primary because we're not going to be adding any more partitions. If we were going to be adding more, like say one for your home or one for your var directory, you would make this partition as logical. Then that way you can just keep adding more partitions later on. And even after you install the operating system, as long as your last partition is logical, you'll be able to add more. But yeah, for today, I'm just going to go with primary though, because we're only going to be using the 4. And as far as your recovery, yeah, ext4 is good. Mount point I'm going to change though from home to recovery. And it's not listed here, so we're going to have to scroll down and select enter manually. And I'm just going to put recovery. Don't forget the / there either. And then hit enter. And the label's already done. Yeah, that's just because I was playing with this earlier. And bootable flag is of course off. And select on setting up partition. And that's it. We're all done with the partitioning. So yeah, once again, if you are adding more partitions, just make sure the number 4 partition is set to logical. So the only primaries that you'll want are the first 3. And then the 4th one will be logical, as well as all the following partitions after that will also be logical. So yeah, whenever you're setting up more than partitions with master boot record, just make the first 3 primary and the rest are logical, and you should be good to go. And each partition will be set up just like we did with recovery, except they'll be logical. And that's it. So yeah, I think I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to highlight finish partitioning and write changes to disk. But actually, before we continue, I don't really want to go back on the install at this point. So I'm just going to go through and double check each one. I'm sure they're all fine, but it's always nice to have that peace of mind. So on the boot, I'll hit enter. I'll just make sure it's ext2. Mount point is boot. Label is boot. Bootable flag is off. And done setting up partition. And then we have root. ext4, which is good. Mount point is at root. Label is root. Bootable flag is on. We'll select on setting up partition. Then we got our swap. Not too much to see here. Just make sure the file system says swap area and bootable flag is off. And then select on setting up partition. And then we have recovery, ext4, which is what we want. Mount point is at recovery. Mount options, yeah, we don't have to worry about that. Labels recovery, bootable flag is off. And then select on setting up partition. And when you're happy with the way everything looks, just select finish partitioning and write changes to disk and hit enter. So here we can just have a quick double check. This is boot, ext2, root, ext4, swap is swap, and then recovery is also ext4. And in case you're wondering why these say VDA, yours will most likely say SDA. This is just because mine's a virtual machine, so that's why the V is there instead of the S. And I'm happy with that, so I'm going to enable the yes radio box there, and then hit enter. And let the installer do its thing. So installing the system. I may pause the video here because this may take a little bit of time. It usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes it's a little bit faster, sometimes it's slower, I guess depending on your hardware too. Being this is a virtual machine with only a couple CPUs and 4 gigabytes of RAM, I'm guessing it may take closer to 10 minutes. So yeah, I'm just going to pause the video and I'll check back with you when it's all done. Okay, now we're all done with the main part of the install, and it's just asking if you want to install a network mirror. And yes is already selected, and I'm definitely going to pick that because I found the network speed was much faster with the mirror. So I'm just going to click on continue, and use United States, click on continue. Same thing with Debian.org, click continue. And I'm going to skip the proxy here and just hit continue. Configuring the package manager. It shouldn't take long, but yeah, if it does, I'll just pause the video. Which, yeah, I may do. I'll be back in a minute or two. Okay, so now it's just installing the Grub bootloader. And this part's really important. You definitely want to make sure yes is selected here. If you don't, your system most likely won't boot, especially because we didn't set the bootable flag to on the boot partition. So we'll definitely need Grub. So yeah, just make sure that's selected as yes, and then click on continue. And then select whichever drive you're using, or volume rather. And you can see mine here is VDA. Those will most likely be SDA. So I just select that and click on continue. And then it'll finish installing Grub. Finishing up the installation. So after we're all installed, I'll show you how to install and set up Timeshift, and then we'll take a snapshot of the system and make sure it's being stored in our recovery partition. And then after that, I think we'll remove some applications and lastly restore the system from the snapshot. Just to make sure everything is okay with the system, it's up and running, and we're able to restore it if anything happens to go wrong, which actually is a much easier process than you think. But in case you've never done it before, I'll definitely show you. And yeah, we'll get that out of the way. So as you can see, the installation is complete. It's time to boot into your new system. Make sure to remove the installation media so you boot into your new system rather than restarting the installation. Okay, so I'm just going to click on continue. And for some reason, believe it or not, this is probably the longest part of the install. This progress bar isn't very accurate. It always just whips up to this point right here and then just stops. But in case you're wondering why this part right here took about half a second and this takes about 5 minutes, that's totally normal. So, but as soon as it does start progressing past this point though, that's when you're going to want to grab your USB and get ready to pull it out. Because after it does, you literally are sorry, I can't talk today, are only going to have a few seconds after this bar starts to move again. So, yeah, because this does take a while, I think I am going to pause the video. But yeah, I just keep that in mind. As soon as this starts to move, get ready to pull out your USB. So as you can see, this progress bar just started to progress again. So I get ready to move your USB. And you can do that right about, just waiting for the screen to go black now. So yeah, you can see you only have maybe 2 or 3 seconds there. Not much time at all, but just enough. And then I'll make this full screen. I'm going to boot up in the new install. So it was kind of the exciting part. And here we go with the login page. So I'm just going to select my login name. And then I just always double check with the gear icon here. If you leave it at default as GNOME, you'll be using Wayland. But if you want to use X11 instead, you just have to select that first option. And then every time you log in after that, the Debian operating system should remember that. So the first time you do this should be the only time you need to. And then I'm going to throw my password. Enter. Yeah, and here's our new operating system. Well, typically I normally just give it 2 or 3 minutes, just in case it is trying to update the system in the background. Because I find whenever I fire up the terminal right away and throw in some like sudo apt update, sometimes I'll get an error saying that apt is already being used by something else. So I usually wait till I get this box pop up at the top here saying that new OS updates are ready. And then by that time, I know it's done its thing in the background, and I can go ahead without having to worry about any of that stuff conflicting, causing any errors. But yeah, I'll just wait a minute here until that happens. Sometimes it's a minute or two, sometimes it takes 5 minutes, but we're probably fine to go ahead right now, but I always kind of worry about that. I'd hate to start off a fresh install with an error. So yeah, I think I'm actually just going to pause the video for a couple minutes. So normally I just go in the system settings and disable automatic updates or disable automatic updates, and then you never have to worry about that. It's just always on the very first boot. I kind of wonder if that's going to happen. But so yeah, I'll just pause the video for another minute and it should be done. So yeah, that little pop-up did show its face right here, but unfortunately I wasn't able to unpause the video enough for you guys to see it. But at least now I know that that's done. There's nothing going on in the background, and we should be able to open up the terminal, start poking around without anything conflicting and shouting at us. So to do that, I'm just going to launch the terminal and enter. I'll make it full screen. And the first command I'm going to run is just lsblk. And that'll show us all our partitions that we just set up. So we got our first one here is boot. And just once again, all these say VDA, like VDA right here. Yours will most likely see SDA, and then SDA 1, SDA 2, 3, and 4. But yeah, this is our boot. And then our root partition, and then our swap and recovery. And they all use roughly the same amount of memory that we allocated for them, with a little bit less, of course, after it's converted over to binary. But all that looks good, and just the way we set it up. And then I'm just going to run disk-free-h to see how much we're using. So on VDA1, we used 80 megabytes for the boot. So 1 gigabyte should be absolutely plenty either way. Because even though UEFI only uses between something like 3 and 5 megabytes, the minimum amount that you're allowed to allocate for that partition was, I think I said 563.9, I think. So 1 gigabyte should do the trick no matter which one you're using. And then after that, we have VDA2, which is the root. And we gave that, what did we give root here? About 50 gigabytes, and it only used 9.6. But even still, I'd definitely allocate a lot more than that for your root partition. And just because we don't have a home partition at the end to use up all the excess, yeah, you are going to have to do a bit of math on that. So say you have a 1000 gigabyte hard drive, and you're using 24 gigabytes for swap, 1 gigabyte for boot, and at least 50 for recovery. That'll leave you with 925 gigabytes. And 50 gigabytes for recovery should do you for at least 6 or 7 different snapshots. Because the first one will take about 10 gigs, and then each one after that will just use a tiny fraction of it, because just building off of what the previous one was. So yeah, anything over 50 gigabytes and you should be plenty good. If you're adding more than, say, 10 snapshots, you may need a little bit more. But yeah, so far we look good. And yeah, even our recovery, VDA4, yeah, only used 45 megabytes, has 28 gigs left. But that'll be kind of interesting to see how much it uses after we actually do take an actual snapshot. So yeah, which actually I think I'll do right now. Normally I'd update the system, but I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to be using this virtual machine or not. Yeah, I think we can just install Timeshift right now. So sudo apt install Timeshift. And actually, maybe I'll run update first just to make sure. Yeah, and that wants to update 256 packages. So I'm not going to bother upgrading them all right now. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to install Timeshift. So I'll go sudo apt install Timeshift. And select yes. And just let all that install. It shouldn't take long at all. It's almost done. Last couple of percent always seems to be the longest. Yep, looks good. So now I'm just going to run apt search Timeshift. And there it is right there. It says it's installed. So we should be able to find it in our application menu. So I'm just going to clear this and exit. And look for it in here. Yeah, there it is right there. So I'm just going to hit enter. And throw in your password. That should launch it. Yeah, here we go. So we have a choice between rsync and Btrfs. I always use rsync, just because I have for so many years and it's never failed me. So, and rsync is the main tool, obviously, behind grsync for syncing your files, and it works just great. And I don't have a single complaint about it. So yeah, I'm definitely going to go with rsync and click next. Let's scan the system. Okay, and then we got some drives to choose from here, partitions. So we're going to want to store this in our recovery partition, whereas right now it says boot. So we're going to want to definitely change that to VDA4. Yours will say SDA4 most likely. And just want to make sure, and there's our label right there that we set as recovery. So that's always nice to have. In other words, we'd have to start comparing these numbers right here and try to figure out which one it is. But yeah, we can clearly see it's recovery. So VDA4 recovery looks good. I'm going to click on next. And as far as the scheduled snapshots are concerned, I always turn those off. Just because I like to update my system whenever I feel like it. And I just don't like my machine doing anything in the background that I'm not currently aware of. So I just always leave that stuff off. Click next. And here we're going to be excluding our root and our home folder, which is just perfect because we just want Timeshift to be concerned about the critical files that gets the system up and running. And as far as the root and home folders are concerned, we can just always back those up on our own and then just copy them back over the new install if need be. But yeah, if you want Timeshift to run as smooth as possible, I just select leaving these on exclude and then click on next. Read the disclaimer or whatever. And yeah, all looks good. So I'm just going to click on finish. And then we're ready to take a snapshot. So yeah, I gave the snapshot here. I think it was 32 or 37 gigabytes or something. So it's showing just about all of that. And then that'll change after we create one. So I think I'm just going to click on create and do that now. So at least now we know we're pointed to the right partition and everything should be stored right there. That's the main concern I had. And then when we go to recover it, I just want to make sure that it's pointed to all our correct partitions there too. Which it does seem to do by default, and how it knows all that, I'm not sure. But, well, yeah, we'll definitely double check that and just confirm it. But being this may take some time, I think I'm just going to pause the video right now. Okay, so now we're just about done. Yeah, and this time shift will obviously take the longest, whereas the rest of them probably just take a few seconds. It's just because this run, it's trying to copy absolutely everything. Whereas all the following ones, it'll just copy the stuff that hasn't been copied yet. Oh. Oh, come on. Anytime now. And there we go. So now what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this a comment and call it fresh install. Yeah, like that. And then I guess we can close it. And then I'll launch terminal. And of course, one of the main things you're going to want to do after this stupid pop-up has gone away is you'll run sudo apt update and sudo apt dist upgrade. And the dist upgrade is mainly just for your first upgrade, and then all the ones after that you can just use upgrade without the dist in there. And it's just update and make sure every package is good to go. But after you've done that just the one time, yeah, everything else you can just use upgrade. But I just didn't want to upgrade all those packages for now because I'm on a virtual machine, and I just didn't want to spend the bandwidth having to upgrade almost 300 different packages. But yeah, typically that's the absolute first thing you do. And yeah, now that we have our time snapshots, maybe we can just delete a couple applications, and then we can try to recover the system, make sure everything's pointed at the partitions that we want it to. And then after the system's been updated or upgraded, or sorry, restored, then we can check and make sure those applications are back to where they were before we restored the system. So I'm just going to go to the applications menu here and look for some stuff to get rid of. And let's see here. So that one kind of sticks out, nibbles. We can get rid of that. Maybe mines, we can get rid of that one. And yeah, then after that we can do our system restore. So I'm just going to launch the terminal and apt search nibbles and mines. Oh, maybe just apt search nibbles. And if I scroll up a bit here, yep, there's nibbles right there. Maybe we can just delete that for now. So I'll just go apt remove gnome nibbles. I'll throw an extra B in there. Yeah, just like that. And permission denied. Oh, I forgot sudo. Sorry. Remove gnome nibbles. And put my password. And select yes to remove. And then we can go apt search gnome nibbles. And there it is right there, and it's not installed. So maybe I'll just get rid of this and search in the applications menu. And I don't see it anywhere here, as nibbles should be right here. And I don't think it's with us anymore. So if I search nibbles, yeah, we got nothing. So yeah, it's definitely gone. And then next we can open up Timeshift. And then try to restore this snapshot. So after we do that, program nibbles should be back. So I can click on restore. And this way too, we can make sure everything's pointed to where it should be. So our root was VDA2, and it says root, and that's about what we gave it. Our boot was VDA1, it says boot, and it was on ext2. Or sorry, we used ext2. but yet we put it on VDA1, and then home we didn't use because that'll be inside of our root, and which it says keep on root device, so that's exactly what we want. And then recovery, we use VDA4. We gave it a label of recovery, and that's about what we gave it. So yeah, everything's definitely pointed in the right direction. So when we click on next, it's just going to do a dry run. And then hopefully everything we see in the list that populates will all just be full of nibbles. So see right here, games nibbles, applications nibbles, 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 nibbles. Huh, copyright nibbles. You'd think that would be free source. At least the games would be. That's kind of weird. No nibbles, nibbles. Yep, all nibbles. That's a lot of friggin' files for an application that looks so small. But yep, they're all there. Definitely looks like it wants to do the right thing. So next I'm just going to click on next. And then it's just giving us a disclaimer here. Make sure all this stuff is in the right position again. VDA2 was root. VDA1 was boot. And VDA4 was recovery. So once again, yeah, all the viewers will probably say SDA, but it looks like everything's pointed in the right direction. So I'm going to click on next, and then it'll do its thing and reboot. So yeah, just to mention again, if you ever have to restore your system and you're not actually even able to boot into it, you can just boot in off a live USB, install Timeshift, and then just point Timeshift to those snapshots, which I found the last couple times I did this, it actually did that on default, which I thought was pretty amazing because I'm not quite sure how it did that, but yeah, I definitely was able to. But still, obviously, give it a double check. But that's all you do to restore your system, even though you can't boot into it, which is pretty awesome. I just love this program. It saved me I don't know how many times. Recovering journal. Clearing orphan node. So far, so good. I'm seeing a bunch of okays there. Okay to failed, said failed to start raise network adapter or whatever. I get that error every boot up. My network always seems to run perfectly. I'm not sure why I get that error, but it's definitely something I have to research later. And but yeah, just in case you're wondering, that's actually normal. And then I throw my password. Make sure I'm using X11, and I am. So now I'm going to hit enter. And then next I'll just open up the terminal and search for nibbles and just make sure it's back. So maybe I'll just do that now. I'll make that a bit bigger. So I go apt search nibbles. And there's no nibbles right there. And it's showing as installed. So that looks good. And clear this, maybe exit. And open up the application menu and see if you can find it in there. Yep, and there it is right there. I'm not actually going to launch it, but everything definitely looks okay, as I've never really launched any of these stupid games. Which always kind of kills me because GNOME is known as a minimal installation, as opposed as far as applications goes. And so why it sticks in all these games, I'll never understand, but they're actually quite easy to get rid of. And I do have a just a small script that gets rid of all of them for me. And I may make a tutorial later online on how to do that, or maybe just somehow add on to this one. Just if you want to get rid of all that bloatware in one command It's definitely a lot nicer than having to use the store or something and click on each one and install. It takes forever because there is about like 20 of them. But yeah, so as far as the install and the recovery go, I think we're good. I haven't seen anything really to be concerned about, and I think everything is exactly the way we want. So from here yet, you can just carry on and go on about customizing the system the way you like. But yeah, I think for a tutorial on manual partitioning and installing Debian, I think we are about done. Just trying to think here. Maybe I can. Oh yeah, I want to open up the terminal and see how much that snapshot took. So LSBLK and recovery. So we're going to be looking at VDA4. So disk free-H. VDA4, we ended up using 11 gigs. So we still got 19 left, and 36% is used. So definitely, yeah, if I were you, I would make this partition a bit bigger to make it at least 50 gigabytes. And then you'll be able to store quite a few snapshots. Not a huge amount, but definitely enough to keep you going for a while. And plus, too, you can always bump that up over 52 if you even want more than that. But yeah, I think 50 is definitely a good starting point. And today I just used the amount that I did just because it was for a demonstration in a virtual machine. And I knew I'd only be taking the one snapshot. But yeah, everything looks good. So I'll exit all this. And maybe get out of this virtual machine. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you guys for checking out the channel and watching the video. I hope this helped with some of your partitioning questions if you have any. And in case you're running UEFI, I plan on uploading a video on that fairly shortly too. So that way we can cover both bases. And yeah, because I know master boot record these days is getting kind of rare, as all the newer machines are just shipping out with UEFI. But I do actually like master boot record and almost prefer it just because it is more simplistic. And actually on my whole system that you're looking at right now, I just actually installed it with master boot record. Even though it does have UEFI, I just wanted to test it out and see if it runs any better. And I actually think it is. I've been on this system now for 2 or 3 days and I've been testing it out really heavy. I've been throwing all kinds of applications at it and loading it up full of processes, and it just seems to be humming along. So yeah, master boot record still definitely works great. I hope that video today helped cover it, and I'll be coming up with one soon on UEFI. So thanks again for watching. I hope this helps someone out there, and yeah, I guess I hope to see you on the next video. Bye for now.